Hello, everyone. Emma here, and welcome to the fifth audio recording regaling the story of when Blackwater was a home game. Now, these recaps are recorded a day or two after the session, so they're full of details my notes and even Chatwater don't encompass. But I never thought anyone would hear them, so I recorded them on my phone, usually in my car or in my house after the little dungeon delver had gone to bed. So the quality is not the best, but they're worth it to get into the lore of your favorite adventuring party. So, this audio recording covers the Feywild Arc, which picks up after the Earth Elemental Plane arc and is actually the first arc that I have audio recordings for. So, these are them in their rawest and purest form. This was a brand new thing that I started doing for the group as a way to remind us all of what happened in between sessions. This compilation covers sessions 32 to 43, but a couple of these sessions were a side quest that Tim and I will be tying into some later lore, and one of these was the Adventures in Amonkhet, which you can find in its very own audio recording here in the History and Lore section on YouTube. So turn this on while you drive, cook, clean, work, or whatever your day holds. Sit back, relax, and welcome to the Blackwater Audio Archives, the Feywild Arc.
Hey everyone, Emma here with your Blackwater recap for Sunday, July 14th, 2019. This is episode, oh my god, what are we at here? 35. 35. And I am affectionately titling this one The Temple of the Winged Serpent. So we opened with everyone getting up for the morning. Letters had been off to explore the city, wanting to get a feel for the people, and on his own, and he's been exploring with his new pet sidekick, Clack. So Kamea left for the council meeting, which was going to happen, and we decided, even though we had plans to go to the Feywild immediately, we decided to stick around for a day because we thought it might be a bad idea to leave immediately after being in a council meeting where Neppy had said, hey, you can cast Zone of Truth on me. So Neppy cast something to Chi to try and get to see if there was a place that we could go to the Plane of Air, so that we could go to the Plane of Air and then head to Svel-En immediately afterwards, so we could drop off Kern and Kamea and then head up to Alderwood, which is where we would likely need to go to get into the Feywild. So Chi was not doing well, but she was still recovering. And so she said to us that we could travel to the gateway on Mount Elaine, but the better route is to the city in the clouds, floating islands, the winged serpent temple, stone towers. Choose wisely. So those were her words. So as of this point, we decided that that would likely be what we would try. And because Kern and Mira were still in Kamea's house, we decided that Neppy was going to go upstairs and be silent and go be in prayer so that she could, be blissfully ignorant about where Kern and Mira were. So she went upstairs to pray. And the rest of the group planned on how to get Kern and Mira out of town. They decided that the Spooky would polymorph them into birds, and they would fly to meet Finnan outside the edge of the town, and we would meet up with them afterwards. So after that, the birds arrived safely, kind of bamfed back. Kern was pretty stoked on being a bird because it meant he got to have two arms, not one. Very sad. So we go to the council meeting. Kokanee casts enhance ability on charisma and persuasion on charisma for Neppy, so anything that she would be done with advantage. The full council was there. Nissa has been instated as the Archmage, Kamei is there, and as Wendell as treasurer, Admiral Kazim, Cora is there, hate her, and there's been a new general who's been instated. It was either going to be Sura Makrat or Macat, but she rallied the people in Croton's Cross, but it actually turned out to be Illyrian Sulgar, who is a younger man in his 30s, tall, sandy, blonde hair, who seems to be kind of under the wing of the general. Um, Also, there is standing next to them is a woman in soldier's attire, priest vestments of Pelor, and she's an elf as well. And her name is Sharal Starsong, and she is a cleric of Pelor here to cast Zone of Truth on Nepi to see what she knew. So they cast it, and they asked her, "Where is Mira?" And she said honestly that she didn't know. "Where's Kern?" They didn't know. She said, "Are they in the city?" She said she didn't know. "When was the last time you saw them?" She'd answered 3 days ago, because that was true. "Were you hiding them?" She declined to answer that question, which you can do under Zone of Truth. She asked us if we were enemies of Wolfrine. We said no. They asked us about Sindral, and Nepi said yes, she was the one to kill the queen. They asked, will we help King Evard attack Wolfrine or do anything to threaten Wolfrine? And we said no. She said no, and it was determined she was telling the truth. So they let her go free. Well, not that they were going to imprison her or anything, but I mean, we don't know. It could have gone poorly. So with some conversation with the Admiral, we kind of got the sense that the Admiral was feeling pretty beat up about the fact that the Queen was assassinated. I think he was in love with the Queen. So then their next point of business was going to be to just start deciding on the new ruler of Wolfrine. And you know, Nepi kind of looked at Kamea and gave her a nod as to, like, please put in a bid because we want her to be the leader of Wolfrine. So we go back to the house and kit up and like get ready to go, and we go pick up 2 of the platinum rings, or 1 platinum ring, so that we can cast Warding Bond. Kokanee has one and Callie has hers. We needed one because Kokanee's burned up when he had cast the Warding Bond on Nepi across the plains. So we noticed that there was a lot of glitter guard in the city, and we take a turn not towards where we knew Finnan was, but in the opposite direction, and noticed that there was some glitter guard following us. Oh, where is my light? Oh, there it is. Okay. So we're really loud, and we're bad at stealthing. Eventually we kind of get away from the glitter guard, and we scare some dude named Grads. We scare away, he's a ranger or a hunter of some description, and we scare his food away. We circle around and we meet up with Finnan, and it's decided that Finnan wants to go and get letters from the city, and then they will take a boat around to Alder, or down to the coast, and then meet us in Alderwood. From there, we say goodbye to Finnan, and then we plane shift to the plane of air. It feels like a weightless kind of rising. And yeah, we end up on solid ground, kind of on the precipice of the edge of this floating island. Open sky around us, super bright. The island's made of stone, and we're on this large open air temple surrounding a shrine, crumbled columns and kind of a horseshoe, and there's a statue of the winged serpent, and we assume that this is a Kadi. So in the center of the horseshoe is worked stone, and if we look at the winged serpent, there's like hints of blue light. The head looks down onto the people below, and the place looks really familiar to Kokanee, like he'd seen it in a dream. We know that Akadi is the air elemental primordial. She was the last to join the Dawn War and the first to surrender. Her kind of brother is Grumbar, the earth elemental primordial titan, or primordial god, or whatever, and he was known to be, after the war, his penance was to go wander the wastes of the earth elemental plane. So we knew that Akadi, and then there was that tie with Kokanee's shard of Grumbar, after Kargan was basically like, hey, you're destined to wear this shard. until Groombar returns. So we take a look around. Spooky finds a relief, which is a mural. It's like of a mountain range and sand dunes and cloud, and on the opposite side to where there's a serpent statue. And it looks like there was a rougher place where another statue once was. And in front of it is a human set of footprints, a metal plate made of copper. Callie steps on the puts her feet in the place, and her sword pulses with energy. This holy light, her holy symbol lights up, but nothing really happens. It dims pretty quickly. Kokanee steps on it next, and his holy symbol pulses with energy. The copper plate shifts, opening up a space for the holy symbol of Arathis to go in. Kokanee puts his holy symbol in it, and in Celestial, it illuminates. His fate lies in my children's hands. So we're not at that point, and it's in Celestial. So we kind of think about it for a moment and realize that his might be Groombar, because that's who, if this is a temple of Akkadi, it would make sense that she would say something about her brother, essentially Groombar. And in my children's hands, we're not sure who my children is. So we think about that one. And we look at the statue again of Akkadi, and there's blue ore in it, like the veins with ore that kind of reminded Neppy of the blue ore that we had seen in Nissa's lab in Shingik. So we look at the mural, and the mountains curve down, and we kind of get up into the investigate around and are having a hard time putting stuff together. But we look into the mouth of Akkadi, and we realize that it's two pieces of stone and there's a blue ore in it. Neppy takes a closer look at it and kind of remembers that, this is kind of similar to the shard that lights up her gun and the shard that powers all of the stuff of Arathis. So her thought is that, we have to put magic in it. So Spooky casts Tiny Tornado, the cantrip spell that she stole from Zakas's spellbook, into the mouth of the serpent, which grows more than we would expect it to. The veins pulse, the wind is sucked in, and this white-blue light. The clouds then start to move, the island starts to move. This mountain range, sorry, there's a bunch of kids chanting songs in the background, rises on the relief, and the center of it rises. We see these sand dunes pour and pour and pour around until we look around, and we find a plate in a language that we don't know that is illuminated. Spooky casts Comprehend Languages, and we say that it's in Orin, which is the language of the air primordials. It's a bird language, essentially, so Aarakocra would know it, and Iquiqui and other bird folk like that. And it says, "End his wandering, that we may look upon each other," meaning that Akkadi wants Groombar's wandering in the wastes to be ended so that they may, be close, etc. So Neppy climbs down into this kind of weird mountain range relief beneath the sand, digging and digging and digging and climbing down, and she realizes that the shape of the mountain range is a mouth. And we take a look further at kind of the shape that has been illuminated, and we realize that this half of the temple, since everything shifted, is actually the head of a wolf, which is likely Groombar, or at least the face of Groombar. So we keep, or it might be some homage, or maybe it is Groombar. We don't know. So we kind of go down, and we're figuring out what to do, and we realize that the shard around Kokanee's neck might be the key to this. And Kargan had said, this will weigh on you until you let Groombar return. So, he'd taken it in his hands, and it hadn't done anything. And then we were like, well, Neppy was like, you think you have to take it off and put it in this space where that she had found kind of one of the teeth. Not knowing what was going to happen when he took it off. So he took it off. He suffered 2 levels of exhaustion immediately and placed the shard into the wolf's mouth. The whole island then began to shake. It was almost like a tear formed in the island. The stone cracks, this jagged chasm opened up. There was clouds and lightning pouring down at huge chunks of rock. Kind of go around. We had to make dexterity saving throws of a pretty high DC. Callie was the only one to make it. Neppy, Kokanee, and Spooky, where the three of us fell unconscious. And we were thrown off the island, kind of careening through the air for like hundreds of feet off. Callie barely keeping conscious and barely, she starts to fall as well, and she sees these ginormous eyes in the clouds, huge, as the air kind of catches up around her, and we land. She lands conscious, barely keeping it together, and we're unconscious. She watches as the air swirls around Neppy and Kokanee as she sees 500 or 800 feet off that we're slowly taken back towards her. We're unconscious at this point. As Callie looks up in the clouds, she sees this serpentine body drifting in and out, flying, and there was a flash. There's scales on it, and she hears "thank you" as she slips out of consciousness. So in that moment, after some insight with Tim, basically what we had done was we ended Grumbar's wandering. He was freed from his wandering across the plains so that now he can look upon his sister. We don't know how far he got in this 2,000 years of wandering, so it might take some time for him to return to the scar in the Earth Elemental Plane, but hopefully he'll be on his way back to save his people, the Petch, and those who truly follow him. And Kokanee's debt has now been paid, so he is no longer bound by that, no longer having to wear the shard, and no longer having to carry the weight of that as well. Our eyes opened, and we see in the distance really large spires with winged folk, bird folk, flying around everywhere. And one of them lands in front of us at the base of it, and it is Chi. And she says, "Welcome." And we've landed in Saral. So we made it. She says that we're safe here. There's this beautiful, huge statue of a winged serpent of Akkadi, and these floating islands kind of circle around it, which is the temple, and then there's these giant spires in the background. Callie looks down at her hand, and it is the tattoo of a cloud, is the new tattoo she has in her hand, with blue veins kind of going through it. So it's a magical tattoo, and I think it does something, which is pretty cool. So that's where we were. We landed in Saral, and that's where we will pick up next time. Okay, well, that is our sweet little recap. Hope y'all are doing great, and have just the most wondrous week, and I look forward to seeing you all on our next session on, what is that, the 24th? Yeah, the Wednesday. Okay, love you guys. Bye. Hi everyone, me again, coming in at ya with episode 36 of Blackwater, here for your weekly recap. This one I have titled, after workshopping it with Jenny, Trinkets and Travels. We were potentially going to call it Trinkets, Tomes, and Travels, but I refused to add the "oh my" on the end of it, so Trinkets and Travels it is. Okay, so last we left off, we had originally woken up at the Temple of Akkadi in Saral, with Chi standing over us, telling us we were unconscious and we woke up. So Tim had let us know that we had been at the gateway where Grumbar's fate had been sealed, and by placing the shard of Grumbar into his mouth, we had released him from exile. So we woke up at the Temple of Akkadi, which was carved in her likeness. It's about 15 stories high, and there's these beautiful islands with stone pillars that are somewhat connected there. We're not sure what force is keeping them in place. After checking in with Chi, it's pretty clear we've been unconscious for like a day and a half, so a while we've been out, and she's taken care of us. So she brought us inside, and we actually found out that what we thought was the gateway was not actually the gateway. The gateway is a portal, and that's been guarded by stone giants. So definitely not where we came in. She had never heard of where we had been, so that was a little strange. So in any case, we go inside the temple, which is an open air structure, and it's very clearly designed for folks who fly. So we go inside, and there are runes that kind of line the entire inside of the walls. And Callie can read it. It's in Orin, which is cool because she's never been able to read Orin before. She is also the acting high priestess here, so she gets some food for us. And they bring us some food. It's kind of like this gruel that has bugs mixed into it with some berries and some cider. The cider's pretty good. The gruel and bugs is palatable. The berries required us to make a constitution save. Kokanee was fine. And Spooky and Neppy were a bit sick to their stomachs. No, a little nauseous. No vomiting, but nausea for sure. So Spooky asks if she can see some books, and she flies her about 10 stories up to a open cavern that is just lined with a bunch of different texts, and Spooky asks if there's any in common, and she brings back 4 of them. One of them is called the Geographica Gelatinosa, which looks like a encyclopedia on oozes. Spooky does not read this one. She reads a book on plane shifting, and she reads a book on something called the Tao of Air, which was a philosophical look at the plane of air. Talks about the denizens of the plane of air, the air genasi, the jinn, the Aarakocra and different species of Aarakocra, and the storm giants. The leader of the storm giants is the rock giant, R-O-C giant. And what is referred to as the balance of Sorrel. Sorry, you might hear Minx cooing in the background. She also reads this book called The Manipulation of Air, a Study, which is a book on air magic, and spends a lot of the time that we spend in Sorrel copying spells into her spell book, which seem pretty cool. So Neppy, as everyone is kind of eating, inquires with Chi about Zacchus and who he was here, and kind of what his role was. Originally, he also, prepare yourself, this is a bunch of lore dump on the Dawn War, so if this is not your thing, you want to skip ahead maybe 5 minutes or so. So Zacchus was a priest and a scholar who had grown restless and had destined to know more. He had this kind of insatiable desire for more, and had left the airplane and had a sense that the air folk of the elemental plane of air had been unjustly sealed away based after the Dawn War. So all of the knowledge that he had acquired in the plane of air, probably from the libraries that she had been showing Spooky Pants, had kind of poisoned his mind. So he decided to go to the material plane in an attempt to unleash chaos, to, get the people from the plane of air, or himself even, the, life he thought he so justly deserved. Neppy then asks some questions about the Dawn War, having not knowing much about the Dawn War, knowing a lot about gods of the material plane, but not a lot about gods from the Dawn War. So found out that the primordials originally crafted the world from themselves and lived many eons in harmony. And Akkadi and Grumbar, the air elemental, the sky, and Grumbar, the earth, actually created the material plane. And then as that happened, they were slowly pushed aside, worshipped less, as, the folk and the people on the material plane began creating their own gods, and different bastions of belief began to spout up. The Dawn War happened because Istishia instigated it. She or at least that's what they think. There's not much known about what started it, but Astitia was definitely, she's the water primordial, was definitely the first one in. Garrix decided to follow the fire primordial, as they are kind of each other's counterpart, and decided to wage war. Grumbar was convinced to join by Garrix, and then Akkadi followed last, reluctantly. Our gods followed suit, some more eager, some more reluctant. Pelor was quite eager to defend the mankind which he had come so close to. Arathis was quite reluctant. She saw war as the death of civilization, but as a time of great innovation, and there was definitely some reluctance on her part to join, but she did in the end. Melora also saw war as the death of the natural world, and felt that she owed primordials a great debt for creating the world in which she was so worshipped. So she was reluctant to join, but I think did as well. Bane, the god of war, rose very quickly, and the god of the abyss, Tharazdun, the chained oblivion, initially had sided with the primordials, but in the final days of the Dawn War, switched back and begged forgiveness. He, to save himself, primarily. He was heavily punished by the other gods, and likely locked away. There had been another primordial, too. The primordial's name of Uptau, a lesser primordial who was considered the keeper of jungles. He was betrayed, or he betrayed his own kind, but was embraced by our gods, and thus was given continued worthy existence on the material plane. So he, found worship in some places. Where? Not sure, but definitely in some places. So after the Dawn War happened, and Akkadi was first to surrender, followed by the rest of them slowly. So the primordials were often sealed in their planes, while with some more sealed than others. Garrix was destined to slumber for eternity in the fire plane. Istitia doomed to the deep of the water elemental plane, which we had actually seen. We've seen Astitia when we traveled very quickly through the water elemental plane through Sil-En, through that portal, which brought us out up near, I think it was Feywild Arc, the first time before we went to Caradoc. And then Grumbar was doomed to wander the wastes of the earth elemental plane, but now doomed to wander no longer. Who knows how long it'll take him to get back, but doomed to wander no longer. And Akkadi was actually given free reign of her plane, the air elemental plane, because of her reluctance to join and being the first to surrender. So Nepenthe then asked of the Raven Queen's death, and what had happened, and was really unclear. A lot of gods fell during the Dawn War, but the Raven Queen particularly was betrayed by another god. We're not sure who or what or why, what happened, but yeah, she was betrayed and she fell, and then Nepenthe rose in her place following the Dawn War. Another one to have fallen to was Io, who was the great dragon and considered the kind of the all-mother, a proto-creator god, fell. And if anyone remembers back from our adventures in Amonkhet, we were set to steal the hand of Io, if I remember correctly. I'm flipping back here. The hand of Io. That's correct. The creator of all things, the mother, the light dragon. So, something to keep in mind. So Nepi and she had that conversation. While that was happening, Kokani was looking through some books and some holy texts, searching for things about Arathis. There was discussed a meeting of Arathis and Akkadi before the Dawn War. Another talked of a meeting of Arathis and Akkadi when Akkadi surrendered, and that there was mercy taken on Akkadi, and Arathis convinced Cord and Pelor to take mercy on Akkadi, and Arathis actually helped Akkadi create the plane of air, which is why a lot of the buildings in Soral are reminiscent of a lot of the Caraxian or the buildings we've seen in Caradoc. And then the third scroll that he looked at was the meeting when Grumbar's faith was sealed, which was a meeting of Arathis, Moradin, Akkadi, and Grumbar. The decision to send Grumbar to the Wastes was a final decision, and actually part of Akkadi's magic helped seal Grumbar to the Wastes, but in hopes of saving her brother from a worse fate other than that. So, the ice primordial that froze Caradoc, or that died, basically froze Caradoc, and it was the plane of ice in a sense, and so the ice portal was killed in the final days of the Dawn War. It's unclear also how Istishia was defeated. So Arathis was locked away. When the ice primordial died, Arathis was in a material body, in Caradoc, likely, which the energy release separated her spirit from the material body, which left her unable to return and locked her in the plane of ice. And considering also that because Caradoc was frozen, it essentially flash froze her stronghold of belief. So, which is why she was so weak and was unable to escape the ice plane before we got there. So that was lovely, and we thanked Chi for her hospitality and keeping us safe, and made plans to return to Sorrel when we had more time to come and investigate and spend a couple days there and learn more about the city. So we used the talisman to plane shift to Svel-En immediately. We landed on the front steps of the castle of King Evard. There was destruction present throughout the city. Some of the castle had quite a bit of destruction. Scrun Row, pretty decimated. Artisans' Quarter, really taken a bit of a beating. So we and the harbor also taken a bit of damage. So we asked to see King Evard, with Mira and Kern present with us, of course, and we're taken to the throne room, a chamber off the throne room, actually, and kind of led to the end. There's 2 soldiers in fine regalia present, General Durik, a human man, long green cloak with a long sword, and Captain Conroy, who looks to be a ranger sort, and he is an elf. Sorry, I just have to let Minx out of the bedroom here before she turns into a complete butt. Great. Okay. Continuing on. So Captain Conroy. Right. So, King Evard. We find him in a bed and he's not looking great. He's kind of laid out, and he looks like he's aged. He's weak, pale. His face is sunken, and there is a huge impact wound on his chest. It's very clear that he's not doing well. And Neppy takes a look over him medically, and he's not, his healers have done as much as they can, but he's not long, and he's certainly not on death's door, but he doesn't have long. So Neppy asks if she can heal him, or try at least, and she casts life transference on him at 5th level, healing him for 64 hit points. Yeah. In doing so, her rib, she breaks her own rib kind of crunches, or hears it crunch as she transfers some of her life energy to him. He immediately is reinvigorated and looks exceedingly better, and he's able to sit up and have conversation and stand and be, have discussions with everyone, and see his daughter and embrace Mira, and it's a really nice reunion. Kokanee heals Neppy with 2 3rd level cure wounds. So he thanks us prolifically for saving him and for returning Mira, and apologizes that our house has been commandeered for a field hospital, so we don't really have anywhere to stay at the moment. So we, ask where we can stay, what hasn't been destroyed, and he recommends the Golden Banker or the Crow, where we stayed before. And last time we stayed in the Crow, we were attacked in the middle of the night by assassins, so the Golden Banker it is. We discussed some of the stuff about the war, and found that the folks from Smell N were planning a counterattack in Southwatch. At Southwatch, and we attempt to convince them not to attack. I think it goes okay, and they said they would hold off, but we encourage them towards peace, but Wolfrine would need to make the first steps towards peace. So we leave and let King Evard, recuperate and reunite with his daughter. And it's we start walking through the city, and Neppy messages Kamea for Callie and lets her know we got here safe, and lets her know that they were planning an attack at Southwatch, but that's been quelled, and that Wolfrine will need to take the first steps towards peace. Kamea lets us know that the ruler will be decided within the next week or so. So we make our way through the town. There's been a siege, definitely, done on, and it looks like a lot of the boats had catapults or cannons. The harbor is quite destroyed, and the artisan quarters are quite damaged. Princetown is okay. The castle's quite damaged, but the Temple of Moradin's Grace is okay too. The Pigeon Crust, Gus's favorite bakery in Svelen, is fine. We end up at the Golden Banker Tavern, which is pretty intact. Lots of soldiers and officers present, and Neppy, having felt the effects of the day and feeling tired and needing to return to her prayers, retires for the evening, and Callie heads to bed as well. Not before a brief conversation between the two of them, where Callie asks if, Neppy was worried about anything coming at them with the night, especially with her nightmares, and Neppy says no, and everything will be fine, but casts Death Ward on Callie anyway. So Kokanee and Spooky remain downstairs. And when we were leaving the castle, we had sent a message to Letters, asking them how far they were away from Svelen, and he found that they were about 6 hours out. So Finnan, having taken a punch to the throat from a pirate, was notoriously silent through the whole process. So Kokanee and Spooky, they stay downstairs and wait for Letters to arrive. And they wait for a couple hours, and then we cut to Letters, who has been leading a drum circle in Scrun Row, and Kern comes up and says, like, hey man, let me take you to the Golden Banker. My wife is pissed off at me enough as it is for being away for so long, so get your ass to the Golden Banker because your friends are there. So they arrive in the bar and they shoot the shit for a couple hours, and talk to them about gods and life, and they get to know each other, and as Letters realizes that he knows nothing about Kokanee and very little about Spooky as well. So the night, everyone finds their chambers for the evening and goes to sleep. And then the next morning we get up and we decide to go visit Adonis at his old thrift store. We take a look around, and Neppy finds this glowing orb that has a button on the bottom. So she presses, which Adonis is like, I don't know what the fuck that does, and sells it to her for 3 gold. And there's a smaller, so she presses the button, and then the smaller orbs kind of flow out, and they like circle around kind of like a planet's orbiting, and it's very pretty and lights and lovely. Kokanee finds a small dragon, like piece of metal in the shape of a dragon that's encrusted in jewels. Adonis sells that to him for 10 gold, and he also finds this like genie bottle potion that is a blue liquid and like a small dog's paw in it, and he buys that as well. Spooky finds a jar with a 6-fingered hand on it, and buys that from Adonis for 2 gold. Callie finds a small flute, like in the shape of a recorder, that she buys, and then also buys a small vial with a pale white liquid for 50 gold. She also wants to buy a ring and ends up buying 3. She won't answer what the rings are for, despite multiple people asking her. One is a ring of warmth, one is a gold band, and one is a ring that has a ruby that kind of levitates in it. It's really pretty. Letters finds this ornate bronze coin that when you flick it up in the air, it just keeps spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and doesn't stop. And he also buys a ring of mind shielding, which starts talking to him. So we're seeing that there potentially is some sentience inside it. And through some ingenious translation, I suppose, or like interpretation with music and humming and trying to figure out whose name is what, when he figures out that there is a drow whose at least soul or sentience is stuck inside the rim with the name of Volketh, which is pretty terrifying and cool. So we buy horses, knowing that we're trying to make the trip to Alderwood. And the road to Alderwood is pretty, for the first leg of it, it's about a 3-day journey. The first leg is pretty fine, so we ride for the first day. It's well traveled. We camp in a common spot right before the turn off into the Torren woods, where we had been and come from once previously. And that's fine. Our second day of travel, the road becomes less worn. There's no other travelers on the road. A river continues along parallel beside us, and as we camp for the evening, we notice that the first watch is quiet. Too quiet. Very, very quiet. So Neppy and Spooky and Callie are up on the first watch. And there's some deer that come by, but they're pretty quiet and they're heading south away from us, so, which is kind of strange. Spooky sends Wiggles off into the woods trying to see if he could figure anything out, and he does not return. He can't she can't like bamf him back to her, so we can assume, oops, I dropped my phone, that he is likely dead, which is not good. Then Kokanee and Letters take second watch. They hear the sounds of faint wings whooshing, and they see 2 large shapes, wingspan about 4 feet each, silhouetted in the dark. And then coming out of the tree line, they hear a large figure, or they see a large figure outlined, and they hear a click. Kokanee gets a crossbow bolt in the chest and dealing him some surprise damage, but also feeling some extra necrotic energy, it looks like, as it's seeped in and kind of hovering over his chest. And just before we rolled initiative, that is where we chose to end for the evening, with plans to pick up on Thursday of this upcoming week. So yeah, so thank you so much, and love you guys, and yeah, can't wait for the next session. Okay, bye. Okay, everyone, welcome to recap for episode 38 of Blackwater, happened on August 1st, 2019, that I have titled They Mostly Come at Night. So we open in the woods, just near on the road to Alderwood, just near the trail or the road that would take us to Torren, as we travel from Scylla into Alderwood. So we open in combat after Kokanee had been shot in the chest with a crossbolt with some necrotic energy. We hear the like the burning up of a scroll of paper, and Finnan and Letters are trapped in a 4th cage as we see these bat-like creatures covered in spines fly down towards us. Callie starts off initiative up first, and she starts by trying to sprouting her wings and flying up and trying to get some shots in at the bat-like creatures, but missing. The large creature that had the crossbow lumbers out of the forest, shooting Callie and paralyzing her with some arrows. And the other creatures go, and there's tail swipes and biting, and they have little bone tridents, and the large creature can vanish, so he's disappearing into the woods. Kokanee gets in some good hits with his rapier, and Neppy throws some strong guiding bolts in his direction to try and illuminate where he is. It's a pretty long battle, with Callie being restrained in a net a couple times. Callie taking some, and Spooky taking some pretty big damage from the arrows, the crossbow bolts. At one point, the large creature, which we have never seen before, but is actually looks like a bounty hunter of some description, takes off running into the woods, and Kokanee grabs Neppy, and he uses the Cape of the Mountebank to dimension door into the woods where he thinks it's going to be. We get a little bit like off, and so we try and make our way back, but the creature doubles back and attempts to take Callie out, knocking her unconscious, as Kokanee deals the final blow with his gun. The creature pulsates twice, and as Callie is unconscious, the creature explodes, and Callie fails 2 death saves. Kokanee heals her with a healing word, and we run back to heal her up as Finnan heals her, and the force cage drops. We spend the rest of the night there resting, investigating the spine devil remains, which is what they are, and I think it was like an Orlodon, I think is what the creature was called, if you remember me right. Finnan and Letters take the watch for the rest of the evening, having been fine inside the force cage, and Nippy tells them no drumming. Letters protests and asks for soft drumming instead, so everyone gets a full night's rest. The next morning we ride down the smaller road, seeing a town in the distance on the other side of a lake. The lake smells kind of sulfurous, and there's dead fish floating in the lake, birds. The plant life around the lake seems poisoned and dead as well, and across the lake we see a village with dark black smoke coming from it. Though we have a boat, we opt not to use the boat, and we attempt to ride hard on the horses around the lake. Callie and Spooky's horse falls behind for a moment, but we ride the horses as much as we can, and we head to the other side. The smoke is coming from the outskirts of a village, and we arrive and hear like someone yell, "Hold!" It's a cloaked figure. He's hooded, he's carrying a staff, he's large, broad, dark bluish skin with a chin beard, and he's a furbolg. And as we kind of he approaches us around us, Neppy notices that there are a couple of displacer beasts about 40 feet away, padding alongside of us. We meet him, and he tells us his name is Yelric. Callie describes her visions, and he starts to trust us, and he says our arrival is fortuitous. The situation is dire, and he hopes that we can help. The city we arrive in, we assume, is Alderwood. It's in 2 parts. There's some huts by the lake, and the tree line has some houses in it as well, like tree houses, and there's a makeshift barricades looking outside what looks to be a longhouse. Yelric realizes that Callie is guided by the Wild Mother, and says that he will introduce us to Vidania, the village elder. So we meet Vidania, and she tells us that the forest has been blighted, and the village's people have been getting sick. There's a rot and a disease that is taking them. She's a small half-elven woman, and tells us that Feylear, their healer, has been doing as much as she can, but she doesn't know. They out a bit out of her death. There's about 30 to 40 people who are sick, children, elderly, and warriors as well, who have gone off into the woods. She says the village is really hurting because most of they're not a farming people. Most of their food comes from the lake and the woods, but they've been being attacked every evening by these creatures that have been coming out of the woods. there's some makeshift barricades to try and prevent entry. Vidania says that the forest has been blighted. Alderwood is close to the Feywild, and she wonders if something is coming through from the gateway. There are, as we take a look outside, there are owl bears next to some cloaked figures moving throughout the canopy. Vidania knows that the journey to the Feywild is not easy. It's a sacred one and not to be taken lightly. There is no way that she can send a guide with us. We would have to go alone. She had sent a party to the gateway, but they had not returned. The gateway is known as the Alderdawn. With their village under siege, she hoped that we could have help to, that we could help root out the evil. The group of people here is known as the Ashrif, and they are the keepers of the passage. They feel like they've been overwhelmed and something is corrupting the forest. The trees are sick, the beasts are feral, and there's these unnatural creatures. And yeah, as I said, a whole bunch of people have fallen ill. This sickness that's consuming them from the inside. So to get to the Feywild, we must head towards the Alderdawn, which is the forest, and allow ourselves to get lost in the forest. The Alder Gate will reveal itself only when we are truly lost. The question being, is the gate corrupted? And are these things that are assailing the town at night coming through the gateway? So after this, we offer our services for healing, and we meet Feylir in the longhouse, and there are 30 to 40 people who are laid out sick. Humans, furbolgs, elves, a mix of people. We spend quite a bit of time curing diseases. Callie uses her lay on hands to cure disease, and Neppy uses lesser restoration, and the rest provides some. So does Finnan, and the rest provides some cure wounds to take some of the pain off, with Neppy using some vials of her white water to help around. Is decided that Finnan stays up for most of the night to heal people as much as he can, and Neppy, Kokanee, and Spooky, and Callie stay up for a little bit to take a first watch, and while Neppy sleeps with her spells mostly depleted, everything other than first level spells depleted. At around 1 to 2 a.m. there's a howl, which forces everyone to make a constitution wisdom saving throw. Kokanee fails it, and this sad, yearning howl makes him feel really frightened to the point where he cannot go outside. About 10 minutes pass as he shakes off the fright, and there's this quiet, followed by this shouting and roaring. Everyone runs outside. Neppy awakes, and they go as well. So there is a creature. There's a bunch of creatures outside. There are what we see as the displacer beasts from before, some owl bears, a griffin, an unkeg, and a bullet, as that are kind of running around being attacked by these dog-like creatures with burning eyes, that we can only assume are coming from either the corrupted gate. But all of these creatures, like, where are they coming from? So Letters goes and runs towards helping the owl bears. Finnan and Neppy stay near the gate of the longhouse, and Neppy does as much as she can with her gun, and providing some healing from a distance, and Finnan just a whole bunch of Eldritch Blast. Kokanee casts Warding Bond on Callie, realizing that if one of them were to go down, Callie would be the only way to revivify, as Neppy's spells are completely depleted. There was also hippogriffs too. Spooky goes and does some big damage on a lot of the hellhounds as well, and along with the what they're known as the defenders, or the keepers of the passage, we end up killing all of the hellhounds, not before the hellhounds get some pretty serious damage onto two owl bears that are on the right hand side. As the battle ends, the creatures that are still alive, the displacer beast, the owlbears, the griffin, the onkeg, and the hippogriff, and the bullet, shift back into people. Everyone here is a druid. These are Kamea's people. And Kamea had told us not to speak of her, not to say her name. And the owlbears are actually Kamea's parents, who are named Rudan and Galea, Sky Singer. So the displacer beasts are wood elves named Leah and Lamlas. The griffin was Vidania. The Ankeg, Yelric, and the bullet named Aldana, who is a furbolg. So Callie shares a knowing glance with Kamea's parents and kind of casually discusses with them that, she knows an owlbear also, and makes a plan to talk to Galea, Kamea's mother, at some point. So they speak of the howl being another creature into the woods, and discuss that the party who had gone to find it, a full furbolg named Kelkin, a human named Cedric, and a full elf named Hassa, who have been missing. So Neppy, being almost sleep delirious and completely spell tapped, goes and basically collapses and sleeps, with Kokanee tucking her in and keeping a look over the people in the infirmary. Callie takes a moment to speak to Galea, Kamea's mother, and Galea checks in on Kamea and asks how she's doing. Kamea was exiled by her people. We still don't know why. And they're forbidden to say her name, and Galea's worried that Rudan will never forgive her. Galea says to Callie that she's going to write a letter for Kamea, for Callie to give to her. And Callie, at the end of the discussion, asks Galea which ring that she had bought in the last episode is her favorite, with Galea saying the ring of warmth, the one with the wood in it, was her favorite. So we sleep for the rest of the night, and we, with not much assailing, and we meet with Yelric in the morning, who says he'll walk us to the passage to the Alderdawn, the start of the forest, to let us kind of go on our merry way. We're not sure what the disease is that has taken the people. Before Neppy leaves, she gives a vial of white water to Feywild. Galea slips Callie the note for Kamea, and Yelric takes us off on the path to the edge of the forest. The trees, we take a look, the wood is starting to rot, and it almost looks like the wood is charred from the inside out. It's a fungus, and as Neppy cuts a piece off to take a look at it, it falls, and Spooky instinctively goes to catch it, and when she touches it, some spores are released. She inhales and coughs. Nothing happens to her. They recognize this fungus as being from the Feywild, but it shouldn't be as potent as it is here. It's called silent decay, but the effects seem to be much more intense than they have been in the Feywild before. But they're here on the material plane, which is very strange. Yelric discusses that the fungus is growing exceedingly fast and consuming the forest. So he tells us to be aware of that. And then we look at the pathway into the Alderdawn, or the lack thereof, and prepare ourselves to go get lost. Yelric gives us 2 basic healing potions, which is all they can spare at this time, and we head off into the path into the Alderdawn. So that is our episode 38. Thank you all for listening. Looking forward. I think next session planned is Monday the 12th, just because of people being away and other commitments. So hope y'all can make it. Love you guys. Talk to you soon. Bye. Hi everyone. So getting started here with our recap for this week's episode, which was episode 40 of Blackwater. It happened on August 12th, 2019. That I have titled Lost. So it starts off as we are leaving Alderwood, and Yelric takes us to the edge of the Alderdawn, the forest that will lead us to the Alder Gate, which is the pathway into the Feywild, and he bids us farewell and thanks us for our help at the village, and we set on our way. There is a path, and we see it ahead, but we have this conversation first of like, what does it mean to get lost? We kind of start hacking our way through the forest and discussing about whether do we get just lost? Do we just not know where we're going? Should we have the people who are the worst at directionality take the lead? Or is this an existential crisis of, okay, how does one feel truly lost? And is that what you need to find the portal to the Feywild? So Spooky takes the lead first, makes a survival check, and heads through the forest. We walk for a while. The canopy of the forest is super, super thick, so it's kind of hard to see where we're going. And but after a while, maybe 3 or 4 or 5 hours of travel, we kind of come back to the very same path that we started on. Yeah, I think Spooky rolled a natural 20 on her survival check, which is not what we were hoping for. The only time a natural 20... Rogue, get down, get down. Sorry, Rogue was jumping up on the windowsill. The only time a natural 20 has ever been, bad. I mean, I'm sure there's been other times, but, Okay, now that the cat's gotten down, I can continue. So next, Finnan takes the lead, just turns in a direction and starts walking off in a forest, and we follow him. He finds a pool of water. The water is pale blue. There's a really thick grove that's growing around the trees, and this tiny little pool in the water that's about 5 feet deep. Finnan sticks his hand in the water, and he's not quite sure what it is, but something about the water feels familiar. We hear a faint snap in the behind us as a giant wooden claw, as Finnan ducks out of the way, hits into the ground. It is a tree of dark black wood that splits open kind of at the place where the main branches would come from the trunk. There's teeth, the edges kind of a seam of like green energy that's pulsing in the middle. And we go into combat with this devil bow. So it moves pretty quickly for a tree, and it was a plant once is what it seems like, but it's been corrupted, obviously. So fire doesn't work against it, and any residual magic seems to be sucked into the center kind of portion of the tree. It attacks us with claws and bite attacks. Kokanee gets the killing blow, stabbing the crap out of a tree, essentially. So once the tree dies, we kind of take another look at this spring, and there's Callie and Finnan and Neppy kind of go to the stream, and Callie has this like out-of-body experience where she feels the pool connected to a larger stream, about a bigger system and like a really huge connection to the forest. Neppy kneels down and takes out a vial of white water, and there are similar properties to the pool as it is to the white water. It gives some sort of healing essence to it, or potentiates healing magic, acting kind of as an amplifier. So we drink from the stream, and Neppy takes some vials with her, and fills her canteen with the water, hopefully finding some use for it later. While Neppy is praying, Letters comes over and starts asking her about her prayers and about her religion, and he's like starts talking to her about how she is a high priestess, which leads into a much bigger conversation about her titles and kind of who she is. And she gets very embarrassed because she doesn't go by her titles with Blackwater, and talks about how, if they ever do go back to her temple, they can't call her Nepentha. They certainly can't call her Neppy. They would be high priestess, and how all of the high priestesses before her all have names that accompany them, and why Nepentha's name is what it is, and why it is done the way it is done, and tradition for thousands of years. And Letters is very sweet and genuinely curious, but it makes Neppy feel very uncomfortable and nervous, so she kind of shuts down and just kind of goes back to her prayers. And so they talk about her goddess a little bit, and Letters is starting to learn more about the gods and the pantheon, and he asks Callie some questions about Melora and Kokani about Arathis, and so they have a fun discussion that way before continuing on. So Callie takes the lead after this point and finds a giant kind of grove of brambles, and we start hacking our way through it and just kind of walking through, and it's like this horseshoe shape. In the center we see this remnants of a fire pit that is there, and it's burned out, and there are two bodies on the ground of robes of green and brown with massive gashes in them. They look like they have been hit with a giant sword. There's footprints and a scuffle, and we take a look at the two bodies, and it seems like the tracks, that it wasn't trying to be stealthy. There was definitely a fight that happened here, something that was much bigger left, and while there seems human footprints, there also seems to be large foot tracks that look like a dog, but bigger. So we look down, and Neppy turns over the two bodies. One is a furbolg male, and we take this to be Kelkin, who Yelric had said that to keep a lookout for one of the previous scouting parties that had gone in search of trying to see what was going on with the corruption in the Alderdon. We turn over the other body, and it is a elven female, who we take to be Hassa there. And we, Neppy takes the jewelry off of them, something to give back to their families if they do go back to the Alderdon, proof that they had found them, some wooden rings, and the bodies are charred as well. It seems to be some fire. Something is wrong with the bodies. So Neppy drops down to her knees and starts to, begin the action of performing a funeral rite for them. And, Letters asks, like, oh, do you need any help? And she goes, well, I'm not sure what the traditions are for funerals in Alderwood. Does anyone know? Nobody knows. And Neppy says, well, in my culture, we burn our dead, and without really any pretense, Letters lights them on fire with the spell bonfire. So Neppy goes is very shocked, and this was happening much more quickly than she had anticipated. So she began kind of like working through funeral rites for these people, and the bonfire makes quick work of them, to make sure that they didn't attract any further attention to themselves. So Kokani starts tracking the sets of footprints, or the tracks, especially of the large kind of wolf-like creature, does pretty well, and finds a rocky outcropping where he and Spooky go up, as they are like literally the stealthiest ones in the party, because we are not stealthy, all of us. Go, and he finds this large white wolf that looks really hurt and really angry, and very scared. So Kokani puts Spooky behind him and takes a kind of a non-aggressive, but stands his ground. And Spooky tries to talk to it, I think, and crest animal friendship, or to be friends with it, but it's too big at this point. So she reduces it and makes it small, so it's the size of a puppy. Well, like it's a medium creature at this point. It looks like a dire, like a white wolf, but it's now a small, just like normal wolf size. Letters comes up to support, and the rest of them, when they hear that comes Spooky, or Neppy and Callie, who had stayed in the back, and Finnan, who had kind of taken the middle ground with Letters, we all come up to support. And as Kokani heals the wolf for some of it looks to be really hurt. He heals it. Finnan heals it as well. And the wolf shifts form back into a human male, who we take to be Cedric, who had escaped the fray that had killed Kelkin and Hassa. He had escaped barely with his life. So he tells us that there was a fiery horse and a being riding it with a large sword that came upon their campsite in the night and took the lives of Kelkin and Hassa. Callie's eyes went wide and talked about that this was likely Baron von Kron, the fiend who had destroyed the Order of Paladins that she used to be a part of. So we heal Cedric, and he makes camp with us for the night. It's approaching the evening. Neppy goes to give him the water to take back to the people of Alderwood because he's heading back with them, and he goes, oh, it's the Moonspring, and talks about how it finds you, you don't find it, and the water that does have potentiates healing powers, but it magic tends to diminish when it's away from its source for more than like 2 hours. So all the same, he makes camp with us. He touches a tree, and a bunch of alder trees tend to move together to form this like horseshoe around them to create a sanctuary of sorts, and to create a central place for them to sleep, which is pretty safe. Finnan takes a moment as everyone kind of starts getting settled inside to go outside, and he casts Lesser Restoration on a tree twice using both of his spell slots, and it helps, and it cures the tree. And he comes back in and says, I think I cured the tree, and Debbie tries to comfort him a bit and says that he's done all that he can for now, and there's many trees in the forest, and we have to go to the source and seek out the problem. So Letters talks a bit with Callie about Baron von Kron, and throws a skywrite up, announcing to the Baron that we know he's here. Which Callie is like, what has just happened? And she gets really flustered, and so she kind of takes a minute. And Letters is like, oh, did I do something bad? And we're like, no, it just might be a lot for Callie to take in, just because this is people who really hurt her family. So he dispels the skywrite, and it's nice because skywrite doesn't actually tell you where it is. It's just really big, and we discuss how big skywrite is for a little bit. So we chat for a little bit and kind of get settled, and Cedric sleeps, and Neppy and Kokanee take first watch. They hear a long howl, some hooves in the distance that are likely deer. Neppy asks Kokanee how long it's been since he sent something back to the Sultan and his father. And she's known that he's been sending various items back every now and again, and he lets her know that it's been quite a while. I think the last time they did that was in Caradoc, so it's been 2.5, 3 months, which might have been the longest time since he's sent something back. They rifle through the bag, and they talk about briefly sending Delnis's trident from the Triton that we had killed in Wolfreen back, and he decides, no, I'm not going to send that back, but they make a point to be like, okay, we have to send something. Neppy says that she's worried that she'll wake up one morning and his heart will have been stopped by the Sultan and his father, and that would really break her up. Yeah, it would suck. So she then asks him about some priestesses that he'd interacted with in the past, and asked if they had been tieflings or had used the same kind of magic she did, or the same rites, to see if they were of her order, of her people, and they weren't, which was comforting to her, and something more than she knew before, I suppose. So they go to sleep, and Callie and Letters take second watch. Letters apologizes to Callie for if he was too brash, and Callie tells him that she's worried about the Baron and a little bit about her life, and Letters really gives this like really wonderful, rousing speech about how strong she is and how strong we all are in the party, and promises Callie that he's gonna punch the Baron's fiery horse to death. Like, he just promises that, and it's a very sweet and lovely moment that made me, Emma, very happy inside. third watch comes, and it's Finnan and Spooky. Finnan talks to Spooky a bit about how they have never actually really spent much time together talking, and that he often gets scolded by Kokanee and mothered by Neppy, and there's the whole weird thing with Callie, and Letters is his best friend, but they've never really spent time. She and Spooky have never really spent time together. Finnan talks about how he thinks he's been renounced, and his dad has kind of kicked him out. All he wanted was to make his dad proud, and he thought he could do that by fighting in Wolfreen, but his dad doesn't want a reminder of the mother that is not around anymore, and I think he makes his dad really sad and really hurt inside. So Finnan feels quite poorly about that, and Spooky comforts him, and they talk a bit about Spooky's life and how it hasn't always been easy, and how about her difficulties and the immense trouble that the Thorn Gates have caused them, Fildo and Cora, who we met in Wolfreen, and how that they ruined her life, and they talk a little bit about that. So then the morning comes, and we ask, Cedric says he's going to head on his way and try and head back to the village of Alderwood, and he can get there pretty quickly as a bird. Likely he'll fly back. And we ask him for some tips about we've been traveling for a day with no luck. Is there any sense of how you would best recommend to get lost? And he says, well, generally then we go for scouting parties. It's often 2 or 3, not a big party like we have. And he says, honestly, the best way that we often go is to split up and go alone. And the gate will find you, and you all go together generally, and you'll make it to the gate. So that kind of takes the party for a moment by surprise. It's like, oh God, okay, we have to go alone. So Letters and Clack take some gloom moss out of their bag, which they had from a drum circle that they had been given, and they take the gloom moss, feel some like pretty psychedelic effects, and take off running into the woods with Neppy wishing them well and safety. Finnan, before anything can happen, takes off, like bids everyone farewell and takes off into the woods. Alone. Neppy casts Death Ward on Callie before she leaves, and she all wanders out. She casts it on Spooky and Kokanee as well before they all say goodbye, and promise to hopefully meet at the Aldergate to reunite and see if they can get to the Feywild to stop the Baron, or figure out what is happening, why all of these fiendish creatures are coming through the Alderdon Forest. So we followed Callie first, where she was traveling for a couple hours and saw a clearing with vivid orchids of reds and oranges and purples, and there was 3 bodies lying down on the ground. She feels this wave of intensity hit her. The forest is almost too vibrant, too bright. It's like somebody turned up the saturation. The air smells really sweet, and it's definitely very different than what she had been a couple moments before. There's 3 bodies on the ground, large muscular gray skinned figures. There's a crossbow in one, the hands of one is holding a javelin, or is impaled with a javelin actually, and the other's holding a halberd. Rogue, shut up. Rogue is meowing for no reason. And one of them is headless. As she kind of takes a look through the bodies, there is actually a figure underneath, and it's heavily armored. It's a knight-like figure, but it seems to be carved from the forest or wood itself with leaves, and the knight figure whispers in a language she doesn't recognize, and as she's watching, parts of the ground start to swallow up all of these creatures, and the figure itself, where the axe was in the ground, grows like a small sapling tree, and she takes the javelin, adding another javelin to her collection as the ground starts to reclaim all of these beings, and she goes to leave the clearing, and her memory starts to get fuzzy, but she remembers and continues on towards where she feels like she needs to go, where she's being called to go. We then shift over to Finnan. As he pushes through the forest about 3 hours, he hears a crashing sound. A massive brown bear kind of barrels through with 2 cubs behind, and then there is another bear that comes in behind with arrows in its shoulder, a family of bears, and he hears the bear, and the bear roars as 2 centaurs come around. Jesus Christ, Rogue, you need to chill the heck out. And the centaurs start to flank the bear to kill it as their quarry. And I believe the line, I had stepped out of the room at the time, but I believe the line was lights out, motherfuckers, as he put darkness on them because he can see in magical darkness. And he fights them, the centaurs, and with the bear that he's saving, he kills one of the centaurs, and the other one tries to charge at him as he sorry, there's a police car driving by, kind of goes and they have a bit of a scuffle back and forth. One of the centaurs kind of takes off to like round and try and charge at him, but the bear, they end up killing it, and the bear, he heals the bear, and these bears kind of start gesturing to him and lead him through the tree line to a grove of some kind. I didn't get whether it was similar to the same grove that Callie saw, but it was a grove. So then we shifted over to Neppy. So Neppy had been walking for, before she had walked into the woods, she had, kind of said a quick prayer to her goddess and done the thing that she usually does when she starts her prayer, which is takes her holy symbol, performs a small sacrifice of like cutting her hands which is generally the way she starts her rituals, and starts walking, and doesn't heal herself, so just kind of lets it happen. She walks for about an hour and a half, and she sees this small creek, and she walks down the hill, and she walks along it for a while, and as she comes across, she sees this large figure, this massive creature, who blends in with the white ashiness of the birch trees around it. The body is ashy white, like hunched over and angular, with a long tail, insect-like wings. It's armored, it's gaunt, it's a thin frame, elongated kind of face with a long pointy jaw, and huge claws on it, and it rears up and makes this like really high-pitched kind of awful roaring sound and starts to crawl towards her as she stands her ground. And that is where we ended. Our next session is going to pick up on Saturday, August 17th, which I can't wait for because I am terrified to fight whatever the hell I'm gonna have to fight before me. Thanks so much for listening, you guys. Love you. And is it Saturday yet? Okay, talk to you soon. Hey everyone, here with your episode 41 recap of Blackwater that took place on August 17th, 2019. As I said, episode 41 that I am titling Beyond the Gate. I know that's going to make you upset, Adam Lucas, because that's not the title you gave me, but it's the one I like, so too bad. When you start making recaps, you can title them. Okay, so we open with Neppy facing off with what we figure to be a bone devil. She starts hearing this like really loud buzz that gets louder and louder, and as the bone devil crawls towards her, she sees these like small whips of light that pop out of the stream and then kind of disappear from view. So she starts speaking to the bone devil in Infernal, asking her to basically let it pass, and that she would let it pass, and she tries to kind of convince it just to like, hey, like, go on by, I have no quarry with you. And it asks for Calliope, or it asks like what is her purpose here in the woods, and she says to get lost, and she asks what its purpose is, and it says it's been sent to find Calliope. It asks her if she knows Calliope, and she said that she does, but she doesn't know where she is, and it doesn't believe her. So the lights kind of come up behind it again, and then it goes to make an attack for her. So it doesn't hit her with the first couple attacks, or gets a claw or two into her, but doesn't hit her with a stinger. So she invokes a channel divinity and brings a 5th level spiritual weapon onto the field. And the small lights behind it turn out to actually be these small winged creatures, which are pixies. So they attack the devil, causing it to have to make 4 wisdom saves, which immobilize it. And Neppy does some big damage with the spiritual weapon. And then also uses Blight to deal some more damage. And then the 4 green little lights go to attack her, and she fails 1 wisdom save, so it polymorphs her into a squirrel. The bone devil then kind of shifts its attention to these pixies, crunching 3 of them, with the last one, who was the one who cast polymorph on her, trying to flee and end up succeeding before the pixie drops concentration, bringing Neppy back. And in a last couple hits, the bone devil comes up to her and bears down on her, and with an inflict wounds, she ends up killing it. And she takes the jawbone of the bone devil and puts it into her bag, trying to fit the skull in, but not being able to because it's too big. So she follows the creek, which then leads her to an open clearing. We then shift to Kokanee, who had wandered for a while and saw a bunch of birch trees, most covered in fungus. But about 80 feet from him, he saw a grove of trees, kind of pretty close together, but none of those trees had any rot on them. So he sees a group of stone statues. There is a dragon statue with wings outstretched, which surrounds 3 humanoid statues and 1 statue of a wolf on kind of a stone pedestal. The statue of a woman is with a staff that has a half moon at the top. And this staff is very familiar to Kokanee. It's the staff he sent back to the Sultan and his father in the very, very first episode, very first game we ever played. There is a male elven statue with a sword at his side, long hair, and another female statue with curly hair, with her arms outstretched towards the dragon, with flowers and herbs that had fallen out of her hand. There's an ashy kind of what looks like the remnants of a fire between the 2 people. The dragon kind of looks feathered, as if it has like more feathers or feathery kind of appended like adages to its face and kind of its wings. So with the Kokanee takes a look at the woman with her arm outstretched and notices that on her chest is a symbol of Melora. He places some flowers back in her hand, these reddish purple flowers, and they stay in her hand, even though some other kind of flowers had flown out of it, and they stay alive and they don't start to wither. The woman with the staff has a symbol carved into her chest, a pair of eyes surrounded by 7 stars, which he recognizes to be the symbol of Saloon. And the man has a star with some elongated points on him, who he remembers as Corellin. Corellin is depicted as one of the patron gods of elves, and he's Saloon is the goddess of the night or the moon, and Corellin is the god of art and magic, with Melora being the wild mother. So he looks around to find some kindling and starts a fire, and nothing really happens. The wolf that is there looks similar to Grumbar, but he can't be certain. The statue does, though, of the woman with her hand outstretched and the curly hair looks like Melora. The other statues have been there a very long time. With the dragon itself there's no debris around it, but the dragon is more pristine. It's still old and faded, but he kind of puts a couple things together and realizes it's not Tiamat, who has 5, is often depicted with 5 heads, but nothing really happens. with that. So, as I said, sorry, this is now that's when he starts the fire, and some smoke swirls around to him up to the head of the dragon, and the stone doesn't move, but there's kind of like a push of air that kind of emanates from the dragon. The smoke bubbles and forms this relief of, fire in the mouth, the ground splitting open, a mountain erupting, trees emerging, and a forest growing through the smoke that then dissipates. He waits a couple hours, and the moonlight comes out, seeing if it has any effect on the statues, and it doesn't. He takes a short rest and waits. He sends a prayer to Arathis and feels her presence, and he asks her for guidance, and she says this is beyond her purview. Then he leaves and spots a clearing about 50 yards ahead. We then switch over to Spooky, who was walking and then follows the stream where the water starts to turn darker or brown, and she sees a clearing, and next to it is a big tree. She goes to work, and it's about 40 feet around and covered in this black fungus, but when she looks up, there's at least 15 to 20 of the hellhounds, like the ones that we fought in alderwood, skewered on the branches. This black fluid is dripping into the creek, which is causing the color change. And it looks like it's burning the tree. The blood of the hellhounds is burning the tree. There's some sap that's emanating from the tree that's pushing the blood out of it and doing its best to save the tree. A body of a hellhound drops about 15 feet from Spooky. And as she talks to the tree and makes friends with it, and as she goes to leave, a hellhound starts to slide off and starts to go towards her as she braces herself for the impact. A tree branch just swings across and bats the hellhound 40 feet off into another, and it explodes on another tree. She thanks the tree, and then she leaves, going towards the clearing that she sees a little further down. Letters and Clack, we switch to. They travel through. They're high as fuck. They're so high on gloom moss, and there's a thick canopy, and it's getting darker. About 60 feet from Letters, he sees a figure that's kind of passed out or lying down. Something doesn't seem right. He sees a wound in the center. The mass is ashy with pale skin. It's elven. There's blood spattered everywhere, and he actually realizes that this elf has been cut in half. There's a bunch of smaller wounds gashed, and the eyes are kind of a pale, milky white. He looks up, and there's this ghostly figure looking down, which we know to be he doesn't know at the time, but it's a death wisp, which is the soul or the ghost of this man who died. So they roll initiative, and Clack and Letters face off against this death wisp, who deals some pretty heavy damage to Letters. And Clack has been using the Wand of Wonder to some pretty funny effects. And so Clack kills the wisp with a fireball. They investigate the body and find some gold, though the writing on it is different than they have come across before. It doesn't look like normal gold, like gold pieces, and there's writing on it that's different. So Letters, seeing the body, kind of tries to kind of approximate the funeral ritual he saw Neppy giving to the bodies of the scouting party from Alderwood back in the previous episode. So he kneels down. He pretends to cut his hands, but doesn't, because taking any more damage would have been probably not so great for him as a wizard. And he lights bonfires and burns the bodies. They continue on for about an hour and a half, half an hour, and gives way to this clearing where in the peripherals, everyone approaches kind of in this horseshoe shape, and we converge around this gate. These two alder trees who kind of arch up, and in the middle is this thick bramble, kind of seemingly going to nowhere, and then there's these wisps of smoke that are coming through the gate. So we converge, and the grass kind of gives way in front of the gate to this mud. Kokanee sees Neppy and starts to cross towards her, running towards her, but then he steps into the mud, and this dull orange glow happens, and this large creature pushes itself out with a humanoid face and this glowing red in the center of its mass, which is a sulfur lord. So we fight it with Spooky getting the kill, and it kind of fades back into the mud. Everyone takes a moment to talk about what they saw. We talk a bit about the Kokanese statues, and Finnan remembers a fairy tale of the mother of the gods, Io, the light dragon, which Neppy remembers some stuff about from when she gave her all the information about the history of the gods in the Dawn War. And Finnan says that it's odd that Grumbar was there, because he was not generally part of that meeting, so something interesting about that. Letters checks out the gate and smells this, like, sees the smoke and is this putrid stench from it. We wonder whether it's the Feywild, or Neppy wonders if it's the Baron has corrupted the gate. She mentions to Callie that, the creature that she fought asked for her by name, and Neppy's worried that it's going to be really bad on the other side. She doesn't mention that she fought a bone devil. As Finnan kind of goes up to where Letters is, and he calls out to Neppy. He's like, "Hey, Neppy, can you still send messages across the plains?" And Neppy says, "Well, yes, I have the ability to do that." And before she finishes her sentence, Finnan steps through. Letters tries to grab him, and he can't. So, of course, we all fucking run through after him. We come out on this place where the smoke is really heavy. There's this, like, the smell of burning, and the air is quite putrid. There are trees here are massive, and the sky is illuminated kind of a dull orange. The trees are all kind of bare, and they look like they've been charred. Ahead of us is, like, there's kind of the lip of a hillside, a plume of smoke, and a crater. The forest starts to thin, and then broken trees are around as it drops off, kind of opening, oh, hi, Minx, onto a dense forest. The fauna that is here suggests the Feywild, but we're unsure. Neppy takes a look and notices in the mud there are just a bunch of animal carcasses that are charred, some half sunken, and Callie notices that the heat in her chest, where the necrotic energy had been originally, feels warmer, hotter. We start searching for a place to camp, with Neppy realizing that most of her spells are depleted and saying we need to camp somewhere. So Kokanee goes to take a look at the edge of the area, accompanied by Finnan, while Callie and Spooky go to look for a place to camp, and Letters and Neppy kind of stand and wait, because Neppy is loud when she tries to be quiet, and Letters is feeling a little sore from the fight, so he stays with her, and Clack as well. So Callie and Spooky go kind of for a little bit, and they find a creature kind of on the log. It's got kind of a large, it's like a large creature kind of for its size, with a big mouth and big buggy eyes. And it kind of opens a little seam in like a rift, and they startle it, and they talk to it for a moment, and they realize that his name is Gorpal, and he is a boggle. So he helps them find a place to hide. They follow him kind of under a fallen tree, which leads to this cavern that there's a shallow pool to, like, about a 20 by 20 chamber that's hidden by trees, and tells them that they have to be quiet. And he doesn't want to stay, and they try and convince him to stay with them, but he kind of opens a dimensional rift, and he pops out. So meanwhile, while this is happening, Kokanee and Finnan head off towards the drop-off. So they walk for about 20 minutes, and they look through the haze. Bits of the earth are trying to start to fall off. Kokanee climbs a tree that is falling off the edge of the cliff, and he kind of shimmies his way out and realizes that the landmass is moving. It's like an outcrop tree, and there's this, like, wave of foul air that hits below, and Finnan takes a look and finds this, kind of sees this as well, and that the landmass is like miles wide with this curve to it. But about 500 feet below, there's pits of ooze and kind of these big creatures kind of lumbering around below. On this outcropped tree that he is on, he feels the tree start to give way, kind of cantilever down, and he dimension doors back onto the edge. Finnan, as a reaction, kind of who had been bracing him with a rope, stumbles with the weight being suddenly gone, and he casts fly on himself, and starts to like levitate Magneto style. On the way back, Kokanee and Finnan have a conversation where they talk about how, Finnan talks about, he wasn't sure if he made the right decision, or that he made the decision to try and scout ahead, and Kokanee Kokanee discusses that, we do this together. We discuss things before we do. We don't take decisions away from other people. Finnan says he worries that Neppy and Callie judge him based on his age. And he understands that, that other people would make the decision. He would wonder if people would save him first, or make a good split decision for him based on his age. And Kokanee says he hasn't had anyone before, and he can't lose anyone. And that when he landed in Kamea's yard, he thought he'd lost everything. So, and he almost died himself. So he's not willing to lose anyone. Back at near the gate, Neppy and Letters. Neppy is obviously nervous. She's pacing. Her hands are wringing, and her eyes are trained to where Finnan and Kokanee had started to walk off. And Letters says, you need to calm down. You need to chill, and everything's gonna be okay. And she goes, I don't know that, and she's terrified that she's gonna lose somebody. She's never had anyone to lose before, not like this. So Letters asks her questions about what her work is, and her, that he said, well, a lot of people I have died. I'm almost jealous that you have people to lose. She talks a bit about her work at Philinus, and that, people come and they offer them, the priestesses offer them comfort and prayer and a place to have their final days in the way that they choose to, and that it doesn't matter who comes, that nobody gets turned away, good, evil, rich, poor. It doesn't matter. They can be there. If they are seeking her goddess's grace, then something is right about them being there, and that everyone ends up in the grove at the end of the day, and talks about how, she would be separated from these people in death, but her goddess would look after them, and that's the faith that she has, and that's what keeps her going. So the group reconvenes, and Callie and Spooky Callie's on their walk back. Callie feels this burning in her chest and hears in her head, "I see you." She tries to hide it from Spooky, and Spooky doesn't notice. And Callie says aloud, "Where do you want me?" And so this plume of fire erupts from the crater. Everybody sees it as everyone reconvenes, and the forest kind of dies out as they get to the edge of the crater top. The trees are almost pulled up and over into the crater. The Finnan flies up to eye level and checks the crater in the distance and sees this massive rift in space. And we get the sense that what has happened is that a piece of the Feywild has been displaced and is now being floated across the plains, and we are technically on the border of a circle of hell. The level of hell that's below us is likely the third level of hell, and these plains are kind of bleeding and crossing. So our sense is that the Baron is floating a piece of the Feywild to whatever level of hell he is from, or whatever level to those that he works for, or something along those lines. So we're in hell, essentially. Callie says that we start to make our way to the underground cavern that Gorpal had shown Callie and Spooky, and Callie says she's going to take a moment to pray to the Wild Mother, and basically tries to talk to the Baron and says, "I'll meet you where, like, let's end this." And we are not super stealthy as we try to go back down into the underground cavern, and the session ends with Callie and Letters preparing to take first watch. So that is it for episode 41. Thank you so much for listening. Love you guys. And our next session we have scheduled is for likely the 30th. No, I lied. Yep. The 30th of August, which is a Friday, potentially, if everyone can make it. And then definitely the Sunday, which is the 1st of September. Love you guys, and talk to you soon. Hey everyone, I'm here with your episode 43 recap. I have yet to decide what this one should be called, so maybe it'll come to me by the end of this recap, and I will just type it to you rather than say it. So, okay, we open up with Finnan and Letters taking the first watch as we're down in the underground hidey hole place where the Boggle Gorpal had showed us from the time before. Everyone else gets some sleep, tries to get some sleep. About 3 hours into the first watch, Finnan and Letters hear some trees cracking and breaking and the roaring of flames, and then they start to smell smoke, and wisps of smoke start coming through the tree branches that are kind of covering the place where we're hiding. Finnan wakes Neppy, and she smells the smoke as well, and it's definitely, there's a sense that there's the trees above us are on fire, and they're gonna fall if we don't get out of the way. So we wake everyone, and we try to head back up the way we came, down into the hole. It's kind of like this gully where there's like a bunch of fallen trees kind of covering where we're sleeping, and then 2 ways out, like the way we came in and then the way on the other end. So we try, myself, or Neppy, Kokanee, and Spooky take up the lead and start heading back the way we came, and with Letters and Clack and Callie close, and Finnan close behind, so the Neppy, Kokanee, and Spooky see these 2 armored, masked guards kind of wearing these really childlike, like clay or metal masks, which are Maragons. They're kind of like bodyguards. And we see 2 of them come up in front of us, and they move to attack us. The roof then collapses. Callie tries to book it the other way out the end, and she sees Baron von Kron approach, jet black plate armor, these horns, very devil-like, and with a red-orange glow in his eyes. He's on a flaming horse, like an absolute just butt. Looks like he's trying too hard. He's this huge sword that is like flaming and has a dull glow in this gem at the hilt. His eyes have this like whitish tinge to them. We fall into combat. So he starts attacking Callie, and Callie starts attacking him back. Neppy and Kokanee and Spooky face off against the Maragon on the other side with Letters. Neppy makes moves to kind of move over to the other side. It's a pretty harrowing combat. Clack falls unconscious, fails 2 death saves, but on his final death save, rolls a natural 20 and pops back up again to 1 hit point. The extra 2 Maragons show up. The Baron has a Maragon on that side, so the fray continues on for a long time. It's a long fight. During the middle of the fight, Spooky gets knocked unconscious by this like hell beams that the Baron sends out from him, as it's an ability, not a save, so he can't cast spells, but it's abilities that he has. Kokanee casts a silence around to try and get him to not be able to cast spells, but that doesn't really work. Callie is just like wailing away on the Baron and these Maragon around him. Neppy casts Spare the Dying on Spooky and moves herself in between Spooky and Clack and the Baron to try and protect her, knowing that she can pop her back up next round. But when Spooky is knocked out, the Baron attacks her again, forces her to make a con save, which she fails, and her soul gets ripped from her body into the sword, and the soul gets taken into the sword. Meanwhile, the Baron realizes Callie's telling him, like, let's just do this, you and me, let's just do this, you and me. And the Baron realizes that he can inflict more damage to Callie if he attacks her friends. So this spooky soul is in the sword, and everyone is just, we're knocking out these Maragons, and we're just trying to do as much as we can. Everything is on fire, and it's like not good. And then Kokanee goes to make 3 attacks on the Baron, misses all of them when the Baron looks so really, really rough. And then Callie comes in next with the final killing blow. The vines on her sword rip his armor open, and she ends him in a like super, super satisfying way. As the Baron dies, he says, "Oh, it was worth it just to see your face." His sword shatters. This radiant light emanates from it in a bright flash. The light fades from his eyes. This swirling black energy is pulled out of Callie, the necrotic energy that's been sitting inside her from whatever curse he has put on her, and it goes back into him as the light fades from his eyes. The sword, these small motes of light, as the sword like shatters and breaks, these motes of light kind of start leaving the sword, swirling around, and it's all of these humanoid souls that have come out. And we see this, they take form of the paladins of Callie's order, and there's Taya, the woman she loved, and who was the closest person to her girlfriend, from this order of paladins. And these spiritual paladins take through the forest and start striking down all of the devils and the hell creatures that had been summoned by the Baron, and they start tearing their way through the forest. Spooky's soul drifts back into her body. Neppy runs over, and Kokanee assists her in performing Revivify, consuming 1 round of the diamonds and bringing her back. She remembers not much, but these like horror, feels like she was just in the horrible nightmare inside the sword. So these ghostly feet appear in front of Callie as she's just like weeping and so overcome with emotion, seeing the order of her paladins again. And Taya is there and, takes her hands and says Melora would be proud, and helps pull her up. Her hands come towards this Callie's sword, Melora's will, and they strike it into the ground, and the sword transforms with these thorns and vines that swirl up the sword and extend from the hilt into her arm, the tattooing on her arm, and her sword is awoken, doing more damage and doing more, just being way more badass. So the Finnan flies up to kind of get a sense of what's going on, and he sees these paladins moving through the forest, clearing the forest. We take a look at the Baron's body now that everyone is back up, and there's some pretty nasty looking armor. His hook hand gauntlet and the spurs that were on his feet, which we think pop him back up onto his horse. So we take all 3 of those things, and then we realize that this piece of the Feywild that the Baron stole to drive towards the 3rd layer of hell, which is kind of what we're floating over at this point and almost about to make our descent onto, we realize that we're still moving and that there's some sort of magical energy driving this thing. So Finnan flies up and kind of sees this cylinder that's floating and looks to be radiating the magical energy that's flying. So we go to it, and we see that there's a bunch of paladins who have kind of cleared the forest near this cylinder. And next to these, there's a bunch of dead Maragon soldiers, and there's a bunch of cages that they had been keeping, obviously prisoners. And oh, baby's moving. I will be right back with the second half of this update. Stay tuned. Sorry about that. Okay, so we're back, and we were near this like cylinder piece of engine machinery, magical machinery. We see these cages with a bunch of dead Maragon as we watch as the spectral paladins kind of go off through the forest from that direction. In the cages, there is a dryad, a bunch of blink dogs, and a satyr, and in smaller cages. And then in this larger cage, we see our friends Alder and Arveldis. They came to investigate. They were pulled into the Feywild months ago when we had come out of the Earth Elemental Plane near the statue of Melora, and they had popped had been taken to the Feywild, or asked to come to the Feywild to investigate what had happened, as Alder was from Alderwood originally. So we break Callie, just like Kokanee comes up to try and unlock them from the cages, and Callie, just with a hit of her sword, just blasts the cages open. So we find that we confirm that we're traveling to the third layer of hell. So we go over to this giant cylinder piece of engine machinery. It's really large, and inside we pick the lock and get it open, and there's this large black kind of flaming orb that seems to be the conduit. Has to do with the orb, and so we're sailing towards this rift that will take us to where we are supposed to, take us to where the piece of the Feywild was originally going, because it looks like this orb is like the conduit that tells us where we're going to go. The machine generates the rift, but then the conduit has to do with, like, the orb has to do with where we're going. So essentially, if we can change the orb, we can change where we're supposed to go. Kokanee prays to Arathis for guidance and watches the inner workings of the machine to see if he can get a sense of what's going on. And Callie still kind of dealing with all of this emotion that's going on, and both of them having taken damage in the fight, but still doing okay. Callie rips the orb from the machine to try and do something to it, and it hurts her. But as she does, the orb grows, and it's big enough for a person to kind of crouch inside. So Kokanee, in his moment after his prayer with Arathis, steps into the orb space, clutching his holy symbol, and we see this energy is pulled from him, and he begins praying to his god and thinking of the Feywild, and the orb shifts color from black into this bluish energy, which is the color of his magic. And then we see that the rift kind of far off in the distance, where we had been sailing to, it had been like we didn't really had like an hour and 15 minutes before we got to the rift, and so we're coming up on the edge of the rift now, and it turns from this black color to this green color, this like super verdant bright green, as Callie's Neppy is completely spell-tapped at this point, watching both of her, Callie and Kokanee, take damage, and with no way to heal them. Callie, from holding the orb, falls unconscious, dropping the orb with Kokanee still kind of inside of the orb, and it's hurting him exponentially. Essentially keep getting him onto death's door with one hit point left. So as we see the green rift of the Feywild, and we pass through the rift going back into the Feywild, as Kokanee takes the last huge hit of damage being inside this orb. And Finnan, as we finally pass through the rift, is the piece of kind of crater, this chunk of rock from the Feywild that was taken by the Baron, lands essentially in the Feywild, and it's and Finnan dispels the orb, dispelling the magic, and Kokanee collapses kind of out onto the ground of the Feywild, into Neppy's arms, and Alder uses the last of her magic to heal Callie, with everyone basically being spell tapped. we decide to rest overnight, just to, or whatever time it is, to get some energy back, because we're all pretty depleted after Spooky having died and Clack having been almost dead, Neppy having absolutely no magic left, Kokanee with on death's door with no magic left, and Callie having had an intense ordeal. Letters and Finnan seem to be doing okay, so they agree to take the watch for we ask them to wake us, and they don't, because they're very kind, but bots, of course. So the dryad that was with us creates this kind of dome of brambles where we decide to sleep for the night. Before we do, Neppy conducts a big prayer to her goddess, and everyone invites basically everyone into the prayer space to see her goddess. And the eyes kind of flare up, and she thanks Nephthisiket for keeping them safe and for allowing Spooky to come back and letting her magic and divine energy, be able to bring Spooky back from beyond the grave. And there's a moment where Spooky feels like the edge of fur and a little tail kind of curl around her leg, and Neppy can see it, but nobody else can. Which is definitely a huge blessing for Spooky from her goddess. Kokanee prays to Arathis, thanking her for allowing him the ability to, move the machine, and with her, that's kind of her thing, with the machine and the energy and all that kind of stuff. So thanks her for that and keeping everyone safe. Callie takes a moment to pray to Melora as she kind of walks off. She sees that there's these trees that are carved in the images of the paladins of her order, and she ends up sleeping kind of in front of the statue of Taya, and when she goes to kind of touch Taya's face, it's warm, even though it's a tree, which is quite beautiful and lovely. So Finnans and Leonard stay up all night. The deer, and we see these creatures start to kind of repopulate through this area of the Feywild, and just everything, the Feywild, these vines and the green and the forest of the Feywild, this area outside the gate of the Alderdon on this side, starts to consume the devils and the vines, and flowers bloom in their place where all of the bodies of the Maragons were. In the middle of the night, this night-like figure made of wood strides through the tree line, seeing Finnan, and Finnan they acknowledge, and it's seemingly like that the Feywild has reclaimed this area once more. We rest unbothered. In the morning, whatever, after our rest, can't really tell if it's morning, Callie shows all of us the statues, introduces us to the order, and gives Taya a kiss, which she can feel the warmth of Taya still. She prays to Melora, and Melora lets her know that this will be a green chapel, a green temple space, and these paladins, the guardians of it. Finnan, to kind of bolster that, adds daylight to the space, and we see that the flowers and everything in the vines start to bloom and grow, and just exponentiated by that light. So we make our way back to the gate, trying to decide what we're gonna do. Neppy goes to take the bone devil jaw out and let the Feywild reclaim it, but Kokanee stops her and says, well, I could potentially send that back to Bakal, as he's had to be sending items back, and he hasn't sent something back in the wilds. So he stops her and says, oh no, I could send that back. And she says, oh, of course. And she takes some damage trying to pull it in and out of the bag, and slices herself and swearing away as she does so. While that's happening, Finnan starts asking Letters was taking a look at the armor, and Finnan goes, well, I could put that on and we could see if it's any use, and everyone is like, no, you're not putting on this supremely evil armor. And he gets frustrated with that, that we're not listening to him, and we're not giving him a chance to just kind of see if this armor could be okay, and he could see if he could control it. And so as that happens, Spooky's also saying like, yeah, we should. Spooky and Letters really want to go find a library so that they can find some access to some spells that they're really wanting, like identify, so we can get a sense of what stuff is before we let people just put it on. So then Finnan starts getting really frustrated and angry, and he's getting quite like insistent, like, no, let me just put on the armor. And Letters takes open palm and slaps him right across the face because Letters thinks what he's saying is not wise or helpful. Finn gets really frustrated with that, and we all watch as he storms back through the Alder Gate. So, of course, we follow him, Alder and Arveldis following in behind. But as we turn around to kind of see where we are, we're not in the Alderdon Forest, and Alder and Arveldis are nowhere to be found. We realize, well, or we think about it for a second, Epi does, and they told us how to get to the Alder Gate. They never told us how to get back. That was not part of and parcel of what they had instructed us to do. So Alder and Arveldis nowhere to be found, but the rest of the party is together, and we are in a forest, but a very different kind of forest. I'd never been to this forest before, and that is where we ended off. So we decided to play. Our next session is going to be Saturday evening, and maybe this is called. You know what? I'm gonna think about a title and then I'll put it in when we go from there. Thanks everyone. Love you guys lots. And is it Saturday yet?
Thanks for listening to this installment from the Blackwater Audio Archives covering the Feywild Arc. We are now completely caught up, and all of our history is here on YouTube. How exciting in all of its beautiful, beautiful glory. So if you like what you hear, come hang out with us on Saturdays at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time at twitch.tv/BlackwaterDND to follow along with the main campaign. And we keep discussing lore on Mondays at 8 p.m. Pacific Standard Time on Chatwater, where we debrief and dive into our recent episodes as well. And remember, it's dangerous to go it alone these days, because your soul might get sucked out of your body and into a hellfire sword. Be safe!